that you're going to do after you have the calculator cleared. Very first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the mode button. And you can either scroll down to do this. I'll show this first example. We'll do it by scrolling down. And we're going to go to Stat Diagnostics, and we're going to turn them on. So Stat Diagnostics, they're currently off, and we're going to turn them on. So I'm going to have the cursor blinking on, and I'm going to press Enter so that on is now highlighted. And we're going to do this every single time. So the way that I got to that is I hit the mode button, and I went down to Stat Diagnostics, and I turned it on. Everyone good? Okay. So mode button, hit the mode button, go down to Stat Diagnostics, turn it on. All right, now we're going to hit the Stat button right here. And we're going to edit. So hit the Stat button, we're going to edit. So press Enter. And we're going to be plugging in lists of numbers. So the first list that we're going to plug in is the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. So you can just press the number and press Enter. So 20, Enter, 30, Enter, 40, Enter, 50, Enter, 60, Enter, 70, Enter. And then to get the next list of numbers, I'm going to press the right arrow. And I'm going to do the next list of numbers. So 372, Enter, 462, Enter, 509, 501, 437, 323. And before I do anything else, I have to make sure I don't have typos. So it is always good before you finish the problem to go through and just make sure that you have submitted or pushed the numbers correctly, because if you have typos, it will mess up the whole problem. And these answers are funky, so you will have no idea based on the answer that you did something wrong. Okay, so you're always going to double check your numbers before you do anything else. So I would, like your numbers do?
Yeah, every single number.
Did you clear your calculator before you started? Let me see. Okay, so let's try this again. So all I did, this is, and this is what I would do for anybody who's having a calculator issue, is you had an issue, I have no idea where the issue came from. All I did is I cleared your calculator and I'm typing it in again. But whatever was wrong with it, it worked. So at this point, you're good. Okay. Everybody good? We're all in the same place? Okay, so the next step is to get these points plotted on your calculator. So the way that we do that is we want a scatter plot. So these points, they're going to loosely make a graph. They're going to loosely make a quadratic, but it's not going to be a perfect quadratic. So these points are going to kind of be in a U shape, but they're going to be a little bit random. And whenever points are kind of random, we call it a scatter plot. So scatter plot is right above the y equals button. It's in blue, and so we're going to do second y equals. We're going to plot it as the first one, and so on the first one we're going to press Enter, and we want to turn the scatter plot on. So I'm going to press Enter to turn this on. Okay? So now from there, if you hit graph, sorry, before you hit graph, we have to make sure that our window is big enough. So a default window goes from -10 to +10 left to right for the x values. It goes from -10 to +10 for the y values. So if you look at these numbers, -10 to +10 for the x values, -10 to +10 for the y values. Did I put the extra notes over there? Can you guys see it? Are they up there? No, that's a test. Did I put them up here? I hid them from myself. Does anyone see where the extra notes are? Nope, they're right here. Amalia, you want to come up here and grab your notes? Since these numbers are not between -10 and 10, if we were to graph it right now, we wouldn't be able to see anything. So for us to kind of zoom the window where we need it to be, we hit the zoom button. And option number 9 zooms the window based on what you have plugged into the stat button, which is where we plugged our lists. So it's number 9. You don't always have to scroll down. We're just going to hit the zoom button and then hit number 9. After we do this several times, you will start to memorize like the procedure of how we do this. Okay, so we're going to do zoom, number 9, press enter. And then from there, it will graph it automatically, but you could also hit the graph button. All right? Okay. It seems like a lot right now, but once we do this repetitively, you'll get to the point where it starts to feel routine. Okay? So there's our points. Now from here, you can see like, oh, these points are making a quadratic. They're making a parabola shape, that U shape, right? So from here, we're going to go ahead and have the calculator help us make a quadratic equation. So we go back to the stat button, and we tell the calculator to help us calculate a quadratic. So I'm going to go over to calculate. And a quadratic is number 5. So you can either press number 5 or you can scroll down to number 5 and press enter. And the calculator is saying, okay, the x variable is going to be based on list 1. The y variable is going to be based on list 2. Now, when I'm done calculating this quadratic, I want it to graph that line for me, and I want it to graph it into y1 so that it will actually show up as the line. Right now, it's only showing up as a scatter plot because I'm graphing those individual points. But if I want to get an equation of a line and have that line compared to those points, then I want to save that equation and have it graph. So the way that we do that is we want to plug in y1. And the way you do that on your calculator is you hit alpha and you hit trace, alpha trace, and that's where all the y's are. So you could graph it as y1, y2, y3, y4. It doesn't matter which one you graph it as. So if you already had multiple things plugged into your calculator, like let's say you already had 2 other equations plugged in, then you could graph it as like y3. But we don't have anything else plugged into our calculator, so we're going to go ahead and graph it as y1. All right? And now we can go ahead and press enter, bringing it down to calculate. We're going to tell the calculator to do the math for us. I just pressed enter. Yeah, and it'll calculate it. Now, so what the calculator does when you're doing regression is it tells you the equation that it's using. It tells you the form that it's using. And so this is taking the numbers and it's doing standard form. So it has an a, a b, and a c, and it's putting them in front of the x squared, the x, and then the coefficient on the end. So that's our standard form. So for today's assignment, unless the problem tells you to round to a different number of decimals, we're going to do 4. Okay, so we're going to write 4 decimals down. If it tells you to do a different amount, then you can go ahead and do a different amount. One of the practice sheets for today asks you to do 2 decimals. Okay, but the other one doesn't say any number at all, so for that one we'll do 4. So for this, we found the a value, the b value, the c value. We're going to go ahead and write those down. So I'm going to say that for this, y is approximately, that's what the squiggly equal sign means. So the equation I'm coming up with isn't perfect. It's approximate. I'm rounding my numbers as I'm writing them down. So y is approximately negative 0.2614, negative 0.2614 x squared. That was the coefficient for x squared. B is 22.5914 plus 22.5914 times x. And then C is 23.0285. The 5 is followed by a 7, so we'll round that up. So plus 23.0286. So there is the equation in the standard form. And then for step 4, I'm going to write down, it says r squared. I'm going to write down what r squared is. Again, I'm going to round this number as I write it down because I'm not going to write every decimal down, but I'll tell you what this means in a moment. So r squared is 0.9992. The 2 is followed by a 7, so I'll round it to a 3. Okay. So there's my equation. If I want to see my equation at this point with those scatter plot points, I can hit graph, and now it's graphing the equation. And if you were to hit y equals, it actually took that equation and it plugged it in for you, and it plugged it in perfectly. It took the numbers not rounded and like plugged them in for you. So there's the graph, and you can see it matches it pretty well. All right, how are your brains doing with that? Kind of okay. All right, so there's our graph, and then from there, if you needed to do any of the stuff we did yesterday, if you needed to find the maximum, you could find that on the calculator. If you needed to find the x-intercepts, you could find that on the calculator. You need to find the y-intercepts, you could find that. You need to find any specific points. Now we could do second graph and look at the table. We could find all sorts of other points for that equation. So from here, we can do lots of other things now that we have an equation to work with, which is the point of quadratic regression, is that you can start with a table of values, and then you can do a lot of other things with that equation once you have it. That's kind of the purpose of doing it. So this r squared number down here tells you how accurate your data is. So the 0.9993 is a decimal. That means that 99.93% of your data is explained by this model. So is this a good model, or is it not very accurate? This is a great model, right? That's pretty darn close to 100%. What's the goal number for r squared? Any guesses? What's our goal? Not 100, though. It'd be what would be the perfect r squared number? 1. 1 would be the perfect r squared number. So 1 would correlate to 100%. That means it's not even a scatter plot, really. It's just the points that are like on a perfect parabola. It's an actual equation, and we've found the points that are exactly on it. So anytime you can get really, really, really close to 1, that means that you have a very, very accurate equation for your data. So we got the 0.99999. We're doing pretty good if we've gotten pretty close to 1. Okay? If you have an r squared that's like 0.5 something, that's not a great equation. Does that make sense? That works for like half your data, but the other half it's not working for. Okay? No, if you got one that was like 0.5, that would mean there's probably a different equation that's out there that would work better. So maybe a parabola isn't the best shape. Maybe a straight line is a better shape. Maybe a cubic, maybe those S curves are a better shape. There's probably a better shape out there that would explain that data. Yeah. Good question. Okay, so now we're going to try it again. So we're going to do second plus 7, 1, 2. Let's go ahead and clear our calculators. So when we do that, we're just getting rid of the numbers in the list. We're taking all those settings out of there so we can practice it again. The reason that I'm having you clear your calculators instead of saving those settings is that I want you guys to go through the whole process multiple times so that you practice it over and over, as opposed to have a few settings that you only practice one time. We want to make sure that we can do the whole process. So the very first thing that we do is we hit the mode button. And you can scroll from the top all the way down. That takes a while, but it was kind of at the bottom of the list. So if you want to go backwards through the list, you can scroll up, because it's actually right here, stat diagnostics. So if you want to go backwards through the list, you can scroll up. We're turning it on. Turning the stat diagnostics on is what allowed us to see the R-squared number. So if you forget to turn this on, you will not see the R-squared, and you don't know how accurate your equation is. You can visually see how accurate it is. You can be like, oh, that's going pretty well through my scatter plot, but you won't have a number for R-squared so that you can quantify how accurate your equation is. So that's what gives us the R-squared number. Okay, so from here, I'm going to hit the stat button. I want to be able to plug my numbers in. I'm going to edit my lists, and now I'm going to plug in list 1, so -6, -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6. Go to the right, 2.28, 1.42. And before we do anything else, we're always going to make sure to double check the points that are on our list and make sure that we typed everything in, our decimals are in the right place. If we have a negative number, we've got the negative number. We just always want to make sure things are accurate. These are kind of random points that should make a scatter plot. So I want to be able to see the points as a scatter plot. The word scatter plot is up here. So I'm going to hit second y equals to get to my scatter plot. I'm going to press enter. And I'm going to turn my scatter plot on. My normal window for typical graphs is from -10 to 10. That's actually big enough to be able to see this scatter plot. Like if I were to press graph right now, I could see this. But if you want to zoom, so it just zooms in to focus only on these points, then you can press zoom and you can scroll down to number 9, zoom stat, or you can just press the number 9 and it will automatically zoom in correctly for you. So what that did, if you look at the window, is it made it so that the x values are near -6 and +6. It went a little bit bigger than -6 and +6. And for the y values, it went a little bit bigger than -1.42 to +2.28. Went a little bit bigger than that for the y values. So when you do zoom stat, it just takes the data and it automatically just makes it a little bit bigger than the data so that you can see everything without you having to do it. Okay, can everyone see their scatter plot points? Yes? Okay, so at this point we want to get an equation, so I'm going to hit stat again. I'm going to go over to calculate so I can calculate the equation. I want to calculate a quadratic equation. So I'm going down to number 5. It's going to use the first list for my x values. It's going to use the second list for my y values. When I'm done with the quadratic equation, I want it to take the equation that I've gotten and I want it to graph it into the calculator for me. So I'm going to hit alpha trace, and that will give me the y value. That will plug in y1 so that it will automatically take that equation, pull it into the y equals screen, and it will graph that equation for me. So y1, press enter. And then from here, we're going to press enter again, and it's going to calculate it for us. Are we good? Okay.